Well, hi, it's really good to be back at Megalithomania, seeing so many faces of people I know and meeting people that I haven't met before. We're going to have a look at Stonehenge like you haven't seen it before, because I, for one, think we have been spoon-fed and lied to by English heritage and the national mistrust. So we're going to be having a look at various points, and I've got top archaeologists backing me up now by saying that stone was defaced, that stone was defaced, to stop its magical powers. So this is Stonehenge phase 1 that you can see here. That's what archaeologists tell us, that it was a white henge bank, and inside of which there were 56 blue stones. That was phase 1 according to all of the experts. And we can see that the green represents the green grass, but as I've spoken on podcasts before, that is not what the eyewitness saw that was with Professor Richard Atkinson. We have an eyewitness. When Atkinson did an excavation of the Henge Bank next to the custodian of Stonehenge for more than 20 years, he knew a lot about Stonehenge. Professor told us it's just chalk rubble. It's just chalk rubble picked out by antlers. But what Tom Gorey, the custodian of more than 20 years, saw was it had been cut out integral to the landscape, meaning imagine a pudding bowl like this. It was cut out of the solid chalk bedrock. That means it would have been white. A beautiful white bowl. That's the phase 1 of Stonehenge. For instance, Peter and Sue were talking about ochre that you find naturally in the landscape, and he was describing his hands being painted with red ochre. Well, one thing I find for my clients that I take around the landscape is ochre in abundance around Stonehenge, Avebury, Callanish, wherever you go, there's ochre. During one excavation in Dorset, Professor Mike Parker Pearson said he saw on the Henge Bank of one particular monument, identical in size to Stonehenge, carvings. Now, those carvings on that white chalk bank were concentric circles, spirals, and chevrons. They are all the patterns of earth energy. So my next slide looks like I've gone mad with a Crayola crayon, but I'm just pointing out that I think Stonehenge phase 1 and Avebury were painted and carved. It was a colourful world. And if we go to Sardinia, which I've been to, we see, it's a bit like a makeover, this one, ladies. You've got a before and you've got an after. This is grey. We've seen it as weathered after thousands of years. But look what the archaeologists have made it appear in its rightful state and colour. For example, it's beautiful. And notice, if you will, for example, the motif of Taurus during the Taurian age in which it was probably built, for instance. But in our landscape of Avebury, we have West Kennet, Long Barrow. That's the second phase. The first phase, and I'm going to show you this with those that are coming out with Hugh and I and other guests, that there was an originally much bigger buildings at West Kennet. They got dismantled and then this type of monument was built. So I'm going to show you those. Also, what I noticed in my secret history of Stonehenge, the Mesolithic people did put up standing stones. And this was being known by archaeologists 600-700 years before any monument. The Mesolithic people were putting up standing stones. We know this because they were taken down, smashed up, and used as floors in the later Long Barrows. So what I'm going to show you now is a light show phenomena at Stonehenge. Now you can see these henge have bends. Can you see they have these distinctive bends? Yeah? And if you ask an archaeologist, they say, oh, it was built in 2 phases by 2 different people. Everything in the ancient world had meaning. Nothing was by chance. And this is a design canon. And a mathematician and sacred geometrist, the late Richard Cardrew, who taught me sacred geometry, maths, and musical harmonics to do with these ancient sites, calculated an amazing thing. This can become reflective. Now, I told you the floor, according to Tom Gorey, the custodian of Stonehenge, was brilliant chalk white. Then, when the moon is at its most southerly, moonrise, which happens every 18.61 years, and if you imagine it's really low in the sky, almost touching the horizon line, and we're heading for that now, especially next year at Callanish, it's going to be at its lowest. Then it will reflect the moonlight from that bend across the floor, and it will look a little bit like this, like a gentle light beam heading towards the stone. Now imagine, stood there in the moonlight. This tells us that Stonehenge Phase 1 was a lunar monument to be experienced at night, with all of the lunar alignments and this what's called a caustic light beam show. Intriguingly, where that beam would suddenly stop, 1,000 years later, they put the holes, the Z and Y holes that go right the way around the outside of Stonehenge. So everything, again, has meaning. And I think this would have been the light show of the moon cycle. It would have looked amazing. And it's mathematically correct, despite what people may think. Now, this is the average model of Stonehenge. We're told it has 5 trilithons, and it's got 30 stones going round, and it's got this arc that was there called the Q and R holes. And it's got a little bit of a longer stretch there. We've got the station stones here. We've got the heel stone here. That's the English heritage model, for example. And that's what was being spoon-fed ever since 1725, when William Stukely told us that there was 5 trilithons. Now I'm going to show you a different model of Stonehenge, and it is a model. I think I've got it near enough right, but I'm going to show you now. There's lots of missing features at Stonehenge. I'm going to show you where they were buried as well. Here we go. You've got this concentric stone circle of blue stones here. You've got a bluestone avenue that you would have walked in through here. And these are blue stones. They're the spotted. The grey ones are just the spotted dolerite. But look, we've got green stones. They were buried. And we've got these stones here. They didn't fit the model. They were buried. And a buried one here, and the black ones are there. So you have got lots of different colours of bluestone. Now, when I said to Professor Mike Parker-Pearson of UCL, a Stonehenge expert, which model do you think is correct? This model here of concentric stone circles there, or the English heritage model here? And he said, I agree with you because Professor Atkinson dug it up. There you have the bluestone entrance, and there you have the bluestone. So why does it look different now? Because 2 cultures really made Stonehenge, and they changed it a lot. And I'm going to show you how some very, very tall people that researchers like you call the giants influenced Stonehenge, and how a previous culture had built the first phases. But I'm saying let's question the model, because I showed you 6 trilithons. If we go to the next slide, I'll show you. I put this one in here, for example, and 2 altar stones there. And like I said, this comes from William Stukely. But look, if we go to John Aubrey's model, he arrived there before Stukely in about 1666 and goes, well, I don't know how many trilithons are there. He said, is there one here? I've got the arrow pointing to it. It's a faint sketch, and some trilithons here. Or he thought, could it be another 6th one here? So he was questioning. He was saying, I don't think there could be just 5. Time moves on now, and you've got other excavations going on. In the 1930s, there was a bit of a kind of weather incident storm, and lo, the 6th trilithon manifested from beyond the ground because it got kind of windswept, if you will. And that's where they saw that trilithon and decided to bury it. Why didn't they re-erect it, you may ask? It's almost like it didn't fit every single model that they'd ever written about. So they said, okay, I know what we'll do. We'll cover it up. We'll pretend it's not there. I've recently been qualified in LiDAR interpretation. I can interpret anything now with LiDAR. I've been working with archaeologists to find lost sites. Why? Whether you agree or not, people say climate change, global warming. I'm not going to get into political debate if that is correct. But we are going to put down over sacred sites every single year 700 kilometers squared of peat bog or trees. So we have to find the ancient sites now. And that's going to change the ancient world. It really is. Also on my model, I had, if we go back, 2 altar stones, okay? All the models of Stonehenge will show just 1 altar stone, just 1. I've got physical evidence for 2 I'll discuss in a moment. So what happened to the second altar stone? Enter the royal family. So we are now at Stonehenge. It's 1624, and King James I is King of England and Scotland, James VI. And here he is here. He's an odd fellow, you know, because his tongue was too big for his mouth, so when he ever drank beer, he was splattering everywhere. He couldn't hold the weight on his legs. He married Queen Anne of Denmark, and he started the witch hunt trials with the Berwick witches because he didn't like women. He was married to Queen Anne, but his boyfriend was the dashingly handsome Duke of Buckingham, George Villiers. Now, they were saying, oh, burn the witch, like that. But George Villiers' mother was an occultist. And she made James I do a very strange blood ritual. They were the first to ever excavate in a written report the centre of Stonehenge. They were with an architect called Inigo Jones, and they were digging away at the centre of Stonehenge. And George, I went on one too many. And George Villiers, for instance, the cheek of it, really. I find it quite funny. He wanted to buy that stone, the Greater Trilithon. So he offered the landowner all of the money to take it back to London. And of course, the landowner, thankfully, said, no, it's our fertility stone. Peter was talking about fertility, phallic stones earlier. We're not going to part with it. So Inigo Jones says that there was a second altar stone, and he told us the dimensions of it. Exactly the same height as the altar stone that originally stood at Stonehenge, yeah? So you had 2 altar stones, and it was beautiful. I showed you the colours of greens, blacks, and also what we now know about Stonehenge is the stones that make out that big 30-lintled, beautiful stone circle previously had never seen the light of day. They dug them out of the ground. And when you dig sarsen out of the ground, it's a beautiful, beautiful pinky silver colour because it's easy to dress or make into lozenge shapes. If you've got sarsen like Avebury that has a crust on it, it's really difficult to work. So imagine that you're pinky silver, you're walking through those highly polished blue stones, and now you're at these 2 stones that bejeweled Stonehenge. They were green sandstone, flexed with garnet and mica. They really were very beautiful. So George Villiers and his mother, his occultist mother, they wanted that stone to do a ritual for James I. And they even told us what they did with it. They said here, and this is a direct quote, that Randall Chaldecott, rector of Bishopstone, told Aubrey, that's John Aubrey, Philip Earl of Pembroke, Lord Chamberlain to King Charles I, successor of James I, did say that an altar stone was found in the middle of the area here and that it was carried away to St. James's Palace. And St. James's Palace was the royal residence before Buckingham Palace was built. So I think they definitely stole that stone. And in 1865, William Cunnington Jr. wrote to St. James's Palace and said, "Can we have our stone back, please?" And the royal door was closed. And nobody has asked ever since until now. And they're calling me on Wednesday. So I'm going to find if we have that altar stone there. So it's definitely been carted away. Recently, in the about 4 years ago, in the Salisbury Journal, there was an alleged person from Wessex archaeology that said he found the second altar stone at Berwick St. Bassett, which is a village not far from Stonehenge. Instantly, I thought, no, they're limestone. I know those stones. It's not a beautiful sandstone. Oh, no, yes, he did work for Wessex archaeology. He was the washer-upper. And so he just wanted a bit of fame. So we've got 2 altar stones, one with immense healing power, and I'll just show you why they have healing power later. But this is the official line by Richard Atkinson and all the archaeologists as the second altar stone. And honestly, when my daughter Raven was 10, she could probably come up with a better story. But we're going to follow the storyline. There's one stone at Stonehenge that has a big groove. Can you see that? Those of you who have been to Stonehenge probably recognize this is right by the Great Trilithon. Okay, it stands very close to it. And according to their model, you've got a stone buried, because it doesn't fit the model at all. They buried the stone with a groove coming out. So you've got one stone with a groove coming out, one with an indentation, and apparently they fixed them together to make the second altar stone. A makeshift altar stone at the world's most famous stone circle? No. That is not. They carted it away to St. James's Palace, and we are going to get it back. Yeah? I'm not going to stop. Wired. Could you imagine Megalithomania putting the second altar stone up, rock and roll? Now, in my legacy archive from not just my father's time, going back to 1899. The custodian I told you about that told us that it was like this, like a pudding bowl, so smooth and shiny, the chalk. He also said, this is this one stone that has been defaced. Can you see that hole there? Yeah? That was originally 2 feet deep. I could put my hand into that stone like that, okay? And a lot of people, including the custodian, thought that this was magical, this stone. Why was it magical? In drought, in the warmest of days, and when your back was turned, according to Tom Gorey, our said custodian, this filled with water. And so it became known that if you had eczema or if you had something wrong and you put this healing water on you, you'd be healed. So what did English Heritage then? They hadn't even existed now. We're going back to a government department called the Ministry of Works. And what did the Ministry of Works do? Concreted it up. Yeah? Now, can you see the water erosion there? Yeah? You can even go to the back of it. I think that because people were queuing up for healing, and if you go back to Geoffrey of Monmouth, writing in the 12th century, he says that no stone at Stonehenge doth not have healing power, and especially if you put water on the Sarsens. And I think this is what the ancients were doing. They got a water diviner in. How did that fill up with water? They thought, is it because this bit was eroded and the water trickled down? They really did investigate it. But today, we still can feel the healing energy coming out of that. And you're not supposed to touch the stones at Stonehenge at all. Of course, I don't, do I? But that's a really good place to, if your hand does slip into it and your ring or your crystals happen to just fall in it, they come away highly charged. So it's really, really powerful. And for the geeks out there, it's Trilithon 50 and 51. Okay? Then, when I spoke to another top archaeologist, he said, you can use my quote, just not my name. So I'm not. You could actually sit inside of a stone at Stonehenge. And you think, how? Because they all look solid, don't they? They look solid. But if we go back to before it was restored by Professor Richard Atkinson, don't let the title professor fool you, he defaced yet another stone. Okay? And this is one of the stones that you could actually sit in. It's this stone here. Now, can you see that's quite low there? And you've got this really big cut-out, carved area with this bit overhanging. Before Atkinson made that much lower, that was his first restoration of this stone. It was up here. And if I show you a photograph, there's people sat in that stone there. And there's a great picture of a dog sat in the stone. Now, their heads are coming out because they're having their photograph taken. But originally, you could put your head inside of that stone. Okay? Now, Atkinson then thought, oh, it's slightly leaning, a little bit like that. What I'll do is I'll make it perpendicular. You can't have a stone bowing to sacred space, like at Boscawen on Avebury Cove Stone. They'll bow slightly to sacred space. So with chain and crane, he forced it upright. And because it has that cave on the inside, it cracked. And then he plugged it up with concrete. And look, even the little kids going, geez, what's going on here? Because people sense that that's what it looked like originally. Can you see all the bottoms being taken off? It originally was much higher. So imagine going inside a stone at Stonehenge. And this is what the top archaeologist says. He says here, when we look at defacing the stone, a top Stonehenge archaeologist said, and this was a quote direct to me, as it had a pregnant swell over what used to be a cave big enough for two people who could sit inside comfortably, three at a squeeze. So that's what he's saying. And it's incredible that these sites have been put into these hands and made ruinous. I mean, I, for one, would like that stone to be put back to its original form and to see what happens. And next to it, you have another trilithon that's fallen down that's got two spine ridges that come down like this. And again, the archaeologists say, oh, it's just rough tooling. It was a mistake. But all stones like that, I've noticed at ancient sites, Beltany Tops in Ireland, Avebury Henge. I'll show you a spine stone when we go out to Avebury with Hugh and others. If you put your back against it, you can really feel your spine goes against the spine stone and you can really feel energy. You really can. We're going to try it tomorrow, on Monday rather. Now I'm going to talk about the ancestors because many of you know I have discovered the elongated skulls of Stonehenge. And here we have this woman with an extended skull. Here I call those the hyper long-headed. And in lockdown, as I was reading several reports, I realized there was two types of elongated people. You've got the lesser type here and the much greater. Can you see the difference there? When I put these skulls against a really tall person, you'll see directly the difference between a round skull, very tall, dominant person, and these smaller people. Their femur bones showed that a man was roughly 5 feet high and women round about 4'8". They were quite small. Their ear placements were set further back, and they made them maybe even have like a pixie or fae looking appearance. I think all of these myths are from what was happening to the people, giants and the fae. And when we have a look at the next slide, I'm going to show you that cranial deformation was very, very common with round skull tall people and with the elongated skulls. Here we see a huge length here, and now we see a lesser long skull with its head. It had a cleft, a big bang to its head. What was going on there? At exactly the same time in ancient Egypt, 3100 BC to 2900 BC, you had retainer burials. And that meant if Pharaoh dies, then it would be an honor to go into the tomb with the pharaoh. It may not be our ideal of how to behave in a death rituals, but for these people it would be probably an honor. And so what was happening in Britain reflected what was happening in Egypt, and these were retainer burials, because in every single report cannot be coincidental that the lesser long-headed that showed many wounds were buried next to an hyper-elongated person with no wound. Well, during my journey to understand ancient sites across the British Isles in Europe, I was really astounded, and I want this to be an inspirational moment for us all. We all think that authors have all of the answers and the research. When I asked the archaeologist that's been helping me out, and I said, has anyone ever mapped the monuments around Avebury, Stonehenge, Derbyshire, Staffordshire, Orkney, for instance, for shamanic burials, for warrior burials? Oh, we know the artifacts, but no, that hasn't been done. So I got to work and I looked at every single burial around, and they were all very different. There was Neolithic shaman, for example, and do you know what? You know that mantra of, ooh, heaving out the chalk with antlers? They've all been reassessed. And those antlers were not used to prize out chalk. They were headdresses because they were polished. Okay, and I've got evidence after evidence. I found all of the lost Neolithic shaman. I have found all of the lost Bronze Age shaman. And do you know what I'm really proud of? I reassessed the burials of certain people that showed a different pelvis, could be a woman, and I found all the shield maidens of Stonehenge, and nobody talks about them. It's the bush barrow man, it's the Amesbury archer. So they are now in our mindscape again. And so I think, be inspired, look and you will seek. It's so much out there yet to be discovered. But I'm going to show you now a long skull against a round skull here. These two skulls came from a Belisnap, which is a long barrow in Gloucestershire. And they were put ceremonially into the false entrance door there. Those that have been to Belisnap know there's a false entrance. Yes, who's been to Belisnap? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about then, don't you? And this is a very tall person. But again, I'm going to show you a comparison between an elongated, smaller person and an actual round-skulled person. When I was with a curator in a museum and they got the skulls out for me of the elongated people, I went, oh, little observation, looks like a child's skull, like a child aged 12, put against my skull. Not that I did that. No selfies going on there. It was about that big. So it's like a child's skull, very elongated. And when we have a look at a man that came from West Kennet, he was an elite hyper-skulled person, buried with his brother. That's the size difference here. It is really quite stark. They would have looked very, very differently. And this is where the changes to Stonehenge will eventually come in. So the round-headed were big, but they too practiced cranial deformation because they wanted to make their skulls rounder and larger looking. If you've had your face as a child being boarded, you're left with two large scars coming down here. All of those skulls had that. So we know that they were practicing that, but you did have naturally long-skulled people and the elite, the kings, the queens, the high priestesses that wore amazing outfits, and really you could hear them coming because they loved boar's teeth, and they put a hole in it and made it fringes for the bottoms and fringes here in the Neolithic for the shaman. But is there any evidence, for example, that the long-skulled people built Stonehenge? And this is where Professor Ian Barnes comes in. He analysed over 35 Neolithic skulls compared to 60 or so round skulls, and this is what he says. He says here, there are loads of Neolithic structures around Stonehenge, and it's this landscape that the Beaker people used as a prestigious place to bury their dead. What is interesting is that even though it wasn't these people's biological ancestors who built Stonehenge, because they're much taller, they've come across from Europe, they referenced and incorporated these monuments into their belief systems very quickly, and they were adapting parts of the local culture. But these two people didn't mix for 500 years. They were separate according to his DNA, ADNA, it's called ancient DNA research. And why weren't they mixing? Then, according to Barnes, there was a tipping point and they started marrying and intermarrying with each other. And by 2480 BC, every single bit of ADNA, long skull, had been incorporated into the large, taller people from Europe. We'd lost the ancient Britons, and that is a fact. It's always occurred to me, why does West Kennet Longbarrow stand where it is? Why does the obelisk stone at Stonehenge stand where it is? It's because the elongated skulled people built earlier structures. West Kennet Longbarrow that you see today is the second phase. There was a much more dramatic building there, for example, that I'll share with you at Avebury. So they had different structures and they built Stonehenge phase 1 and Stonehenge phase 2. And remember the model that they did here? Yep. That's how I think Stonehenge was, with the extra trilithon and the stone that got wazzed by the king. When we look to what happened when the Beakers arrived, the tall people, the Beaker culture came, now Stonehenge changes. Suddenly you've got a mound here and you've got a mound there. They're called the station stones. And it is said that they built the mound and popped the stone on top of it. You have this massive large pit suddenly there, 10 feet long and 4 feet deep, making the trilithon there very unstable. Now we know that trilithon must have fallen in antiquity because there's pictures of it in 1575 falling. I suggest that when the Beaker culture came here and they wanted to have the spiritual capital Stonehenge and Avebury alike, and so they tried to dismantle by building this massive pit, because it would have been sloshing around with water. It wouldn't have looked very good. It didn't even exist. But they did try to topple that stone as if to disempower the area. But what about the station stones here? I'm going to show you what they originally looked like, and this is the evidence that is coming out. But incidentally, if you're at Stonehenge, we're heading for the moon's most southerly moonrise and the moon's most northerly moonset. It's been known, if you stand here, you'll see it go to that stone, the southerly sunrise. And if you go that way, to that station stone, that's where it will set at its most northerly. I was there on this, and this is what it looks like today. So I don't know if any of you have stood on the big mound area. Has anyone stood on that area? It's really, yes, one lady there. It's really very powerful. Now that little marker stone there says where the station stone would have been. Can you see? Yep. It wasn't like that. When the Beaker culture got here, they realized that there was healing temples at Stonehenge. And this is a model. I think they had wooden slates or stone slates, but I don't know if anyone's been to the Buster Archaeological Experimental Farm in Hampshire, where they've got every single type of Neolithic building, Bronze Age buildings. And this is a building here. Like I say, I think it had probably stone or wooden slats. And this is, we think it was all carved and beautiful. Now at the Avalon Archaeological Centre, they say that they had windows in with big shutters that were brightly painted. So we do know that they were painted. And I've got some ochre on me to show you how easy it is to get paint extraction. So, long before that mound was built, there was this building. Colonel Hawley found it had a yellow plaster floor, and they found a socket hole that matches the station stone. The station healing stone was inside a building. That's the first phase of Stonehenge. They had two of these buildings. The Beaker came along and said, oh, we're going to abandon that. So they built a mound on top of it, and then put the station stone on top of that. That's the second phase after 2480 BC. But imagine going into a building and being around a stone. And I'm going to show you the earth energies that emit it. But the Beaker culture didn't stop there. They went on, and this was noticed by Mike Parker Pearson. These two stones here were toppled, and they were pushed outward, because these were toppled by the Beaker culture, and even the two archaeologists are now agreeing with me. I said this ages ago. They are making a different route to Stonehenge, the Beaker culture. They wanted it theirs. And if we have a look to the original way you'd go to Stonehenge, according to archaeologists, you start at Durrington Walls, you would have sailed down the river, this is called route number 1, and then you'd have gone up the avenue to Stonehenge. Can you see? You go from Durrington, the long scold went from Durrington, or they could have gone that way. But anyway, this is the model. They went there and they walked up the avenue that way. Well, the Beaker culture didn't want that. They wanted it theirs. So they made another second route that has been found. They went from here all the way to Stonehenge there. And if you go to that route, you come to these two stones. And they were toppled to make a makeshift avenue to go in. So we know that it's been really defaced by culture after culture, really, and more so in our times. But everyone's talking about the lunar alignment. And I showed you a couple at Stonehenge already, but the creme de la creme at Stonehenge was beautiful and amazing. Like I say, nothing in the ancient world was by chance. Everything had meaning. So when we look to how this stone stands, can you see it makes a window box here? That's the Greater Trilithon, and that's obviously the other ones, and they graduate in height, but that's the biggest, facing the moon. Clive Ruggles says it aligns to the midwinter sunset, for example, but I've pointed out there's more lunar alignments at Stonehenge than there is solar. Then that's true. So let's go back now to the time when the long scold were there. What would they have seen if they stood by the heel stone, an outlier close to the monument? They'd have seen part of the moon resting and the rest of the moon inside of the stone. So that, I think, was probably one of the most powerful lunar alignments at Stonehenge, and it would have looked fantastic. Sadly, that stone fell there, stone 55, and stone 56 is the biggest stone at Stonehenge now. I want you to see what the healing energies of these stones are, and I'm going to take you back to the 1950s, when a person called Guy Underwood looked at the monument. And I showed this before, I think. You've got this triple spiral here, and here, and here. That would have been over those healing centers. Now, according to Master Dowsers, one Master Dowser that taught me was taught by the Kogi Indians. And the Kogi Indians say there's 3 types of most powerful earth energy: the line, the ley, the spiral. We see in spirals here, they're called geospirals, and also the square. And I'm going to show you a very powerful square. Now, when you put that into the earth energy that's present, it kind of spirals out. Can you see? It will spiral out, and we've recorded these in Hertzian frequencies. And incidentally, there's near enough 7, again, maybe that's related to the chakras, that goes up there. And if you put your hand by one of these spirals coming out, you can really, really feel it. Now, at Stonehenge, just like the ancient Chinese, they were looking for particular places to bury their dead, because the lineage has to go on, and they were going down into the earth below, into the underworld, not into a Christian heaven above. So they were looking for the coil of the dragon, as Chinese geomants, feng shui masters call it. And this is the coil of the dragon here. It overlaps. And this is a very famous burial ground of the high priestess of Stonehenge. They were literally the kings and queens of bling, so I really like them. They had gold trestles in their hair, beautiful lunar pendants. They had amber breastplates that came down here. And you know, like the Catholics have those censers where they sway the incense? They called incense pots. I've got them all in my book. But they were analysed, the incense pots. No incense there, pure opiates. So they were really out to town at Stonehenge. And they found it in pot after pot after pot. Is this tradition being carried on, looking for the coil of the dragon? I think it is. And I think if we go to Westminster Abbey, where a lot of royals have been buried down through the centuries, then we find exactly the same thing, the coil of the dragon. And it's wrapping you in earth energy, really powerful earth energy that allows a lot of release. Now, when we look to other coils of the dragon, you've got this barrow ground here near Stonehenge, and you could walk inside of this barrow. It says here, to the right of the deposits was a tunnel leading to the south, large enough to admit a slender man. It ran for 6 feet before separating into 2 lesser corridors. And what did they do with that? Infilled it. So no one can walk inside of a barrow. Then there was another really weird barrow, and it's here. This one just here, that was 80 feet across. This one was only 18 inches high, and beneath it, at the unusual level of 11 feet, so you're down 11 feet in the ground now, an area the size of a small room had been cut out of the chalk bedrock, presumably not with antlers. Its walls were smooth, but as hard as stone with sharp angles. So what did they do to that? Infill it. We have lost a lot of our heritage through, and please excuse this sex-gender remark, but most of the people that have infilled were men. And I'm sure if Maud Cunnington had been around, who found Woodhenge and other places, it wouldn't happen. But there you go, I'm a feminist. Now, we're going to look at the square. Like the Kogi Indians said, one of the most strongest forms of earth energy is the square. And I got taught about the square decades ago. I'm going to show you what most people know, that this is called the Hartmann grid that surrounds the planet, and this is the Curry net. And I'm sure some of us here have heard about those two global grid systems. Have we heard about that? Yeah, that's the common. But now, imagine, and again, ladies, we know this, size doesn't matter, does it? So we're going to now not look at a global grid, but a very small grid. And this small grid, forget about the numbers for a moment. Just imagine this grid can manifest in the land. It's called 3x3 magic to an occultist. So all of these will add up to 15s, but naturally, they don't have numbers in them. It's an earth energy system. But if we were, these add up to 15 that way, 15 that way. And according to the ancient Chinese, this turtle swam out of the river low with the Saturn square, that's what it's called, on its back. And that's a metaphor to deep water, I suggest, which I've always called yin water, that manifests a spiral pattern. But what the Chinese do, and one thing I learned from my Chinese geomant teacher was, they're like the Italians. If you've got a good pasta remedy for mama, you don't pass all of it on. You miss out the ingredient. And that's what the Chinese do. So in all of their feng shui books, they leave out what they're really looking for. And it's the low shu Saturn grid to place your property above. Okay, and it will look like this. And each of those sectors means something. And this is a big vortex area if you're dowsing it. We can do this, we can look for a Saturn square, and I've got some measurements of some that I took as well. So that's like your money sector. This is, helpful people, but that isn't going to work that well unless you place it above the energy pattern. Can you see what I'm saying? That's the art of placement, but it's no good unless you've got it really on the ground. And when we look to some really powerful square monuments, they're very big Saturn squares and other planetary squares besides, and we see earth energies. There's 3 currents here. It's a red line, a blue line, and a white line that's drawn in. That's the colours of the flag of the royals. It's called a Royal Initiation Centre. And we've got other squares here that are showing up in the Amazon with LiDAR, and I'm looking with my LiDAR training for them. Now, the 7 wonders of the ancient world, we've all heard of those, haven't we? They're all associated, according to the occultist Cornelius Agrippa, writing in the 1500s, for instance. These are all associated with these magic squares. They were looking for these energy patterns, and I found all of the monuments in Egypt associate to these squares, for instance. But I took this from Wikipedia, so it must be true. And they have here, the Lighthouse of Alexandria is the Saturn square. It's what they tell you on, even if you go onto it. But not according to John Michel's book, The New View of Atlantis, not according to Cornelius Agrippa. It's the Temple of Solomon. And that natural grid is here, making a kind of architectural statement. So what do these magic squares do? They're said to be a way of communion with the gods. They attract the energy. So the sun square will attract the energy of the sun. The Temple of Artemis in Turkey attracts the lunar energy, for instance. And the pyramids are associated with the magical square of Mercury, communication, for instance, and so on and so forth. And they all add up in these amazing numerical patterns. And I'm going to show you Stonehenge. I mean, I'm not a mathematician by any stretch of the imagination, but there is a square inside of the circle energetically at Stonehenge, and it's the square of the sun, for instance, and it's called 6 times 6 magic, okay? Because people, New Agers, they go, oh my God, Mercury's retrograde. I think I'd better go into a hole and not talk to anybody. The occultists use what's called a seal to block that. You don't have to go through anything retrograde, for those that know what I'm saying. So we're going to go to Stonehenge and see the square of the sun. And also at the High Masonic Lodge in Washington, USA, they have the square of the sun, 6 by 6 square magic, and that's where the sunlight comes into that Masonic Lodge every noon when the sun is upon high. So when we go to Stonehenge, we have this square here. All of those squares add up that way, 111, 111, 111, you get it, 111, and altogether 666. It's where the original energy of the tyrant came from, not necessarily the Antichrist, but like a tyrant. And John Michel explains this beautifully and eloquently in his book, The New View of Atlantis. And I know that John started this, so I'll give him a shout. But this is what you can do to a magic square if you're ever worried about the Antichrist coming to tea. Don't think you've got anything to worry about there. But if you did, you just do that. You block it. Do you see what I mean? You put the seal over the top for retrograde, Mercury, anything. Every single magical square has its energy seal, for example. So with Rodney Hale, I know a lot of people have heard of Rodney here, we decided to see if there was any evidence for these Saturn squares that the Kogi taught the Master Dowser about. And we did find some really good surprises. At Avebury, the first phase was a building. That building got dismantled, and then a stone structure was erected around it to show where it had been. That was above a Saturn square. And what we found, for instance, is there was an anomaly between, this is Rodney's test, it was 6, this is a Geiger counter, incidentally, it's 6.71 counts per minute. Away, 3 meters, it went up to 70. And Rodney said, I don't know if that's a coincidence or not. Go back and see what you keep getting. Well, we went back time and time and time again, and there's always a huge difference in the Hertzian frequency coming out of the ground. It's almost double with the square energy there. And so I feel there's a lot of Earth energies associated with sites. It's not just, for instance, Mary and Michael or Lays. That doesn't make a power center. What makes a power center is when you've got lots of Earth energy going on. You've got spirals, you've got lines, you've got what's called aquastats, and I could go on, and you've got the the squares, those small grids, mapping it out as well. And it's how the ancient Egyptians drew on their temples, isn't it? They used those big grids, 16 by 16 grids, and that's how they get all of their artwork really very beautifully inspired. And I think that, I told my tutor, I've just done a course at Oxford on Egyptian tomb art, and I was saying that's a sun square that they're using there, so they would have been calling in Ra to that square. That one's a lunar square. Of course, his eyes went up in the air, but I still passed, just. So we've got a lot of evidence that these things do exist. Now, for the last 5 minutes, I'm not normally a political person. I'm really not. But do we really want that tunnel at Stonehenge? Who wants the tunnel at Stonehenge? I will burn you later if you put your hand up. Who wants the tunnel? No one. I'm going to show you now some surveys done by a brilliant academic dowser from France that looked at how you get disturbed earth energy around a tunnel, okay? And what happens to that earth energy around that tunnel. In a lot of books, I think it's in one of the wooden books actually, where you've got a survey of Stanton Drew. That was from Guy Underwood. Unfortunately, Guy Underwood, he was a pioneer, and it was the master dowser Tom Graves pointed out where Guy Underwood went wrong, and it's called remnants lines. And that's where people have walked. You will leave an energy trail behind you where even if you walk, if you keep walking on the same path, the same path, the same path, it builds up energy. And here, on this one, can you see they're avoiding the pond? Yeah? So they're walking around. These are all remnants lines, and these are what's called remnants lines. Now, with water divining in the old-fashioned stick method, I thought I listened to what Tom Graves had to say and thought you're on the money here. And so I went water divining around Stonehenge, and I got a huge underground river here where the main avenue goes. Then this part of this is the A303. Yeah. That's a possible avenue. Can you see how it almost mirrors what's going on to the first avenue? Maybe this is masculine, maybe this is feminine. Then in with water divining, this is a huge aquifer beneath Stonehenge. And then you have that south entrance there, which I showed you. That's how the Beakers toppled down those stones, and they entered through this southern avenue here. And the archaeologists say this one definitely exists. This one across the A303, well, they can't do an excavation there, but they are going to find things, and then it will have to be stopped because it's commercial archaeologists that will do those emergency digs. So that's a huge, huge fast-flowing river. And I've shown you that if you put those standing stones into that, it spirals out energy, okay? So if we go to somewhere like the pyramids, I'm going to show you the energy pattern of a pyramid, and you have an object like this. This is a rectangular object. It throws out, and this was discovered by French diviners, cardinal rays. And I can show you these to dowse for those that come into Avebury. They're great to dowse. One of them is considered masculine, which is a straight line. The dotted line is feminine, negative, so it goes like positive, negative. And that has been known for quite some time. And these are called reaction bands in dowsing terms if you hit these. And this is what one of the quotes of the French diviners said. A wall of long underground tunnels, it's the walls that throw out these shapes. Imagine that's a pyramid, yeah? Man-made pyramid, it throws out that shape. Anything that's a tall building or a tunnel throws out these cardinal rays and concentric shells. That's their dowsing names. And he said, in their experiments, going back to the 40s to the 60s, a wall of long underground tunnels and galleries, the sides of tall buildings can, it appears, be conductors. This will be conducting energy. So they decided, okay, if we makeshift a tunnel by looking where pipes are going in the ground, pipes are going in the ground, and what if we put lead on those pipes? They're going to use steel in that tunnel, okay? They're going to use steel in that tunnel. In our sacred landscape, And this is what they got. This is the beautiful pattern of underground water undulating. Look what happens when you put a pipe just of water alone. It goes jar, jar, jar. Can you see that big black line? That's all jarring, geopathic stress, meaning it's bad for you. So they took it away. They took the pipe back out of the ground and infilled it to see what happened. And a mirror image of itself, inverted, never went away. Okay, so if that tunnel gets the go-ahead, then this is going to be geopathic stress. Now, if there's geopathic stress heading towards the A303, I can safely predict, unfortunately, what will happen is accidents what will happen. And that's if they even get the go-ahead. So it's no, no, no to the tunnel. But I want to anchor back to the people that were forgotten until researchers such as myself remembered the shaman and the shay women and all of the priestesses and people of the Stonehenge landscape. We're going to get the altar stone back and we're going to stop the tunnel. Thank you.